So I've never heard about men getting pregnant. I've never heard about this argument. It must be some part of what you call the far left that is so minuscule that I, who am...
No, Jane.
What?
It's not minuscule, and I'm sorry, you can't throw this back on us. I assume it's because you are locked into media that just never wants anyone in their audience to know anything sketchy about the blue team.
Jane Fonda stepped back into the political spotlight and walked straight into one of the most uncomfortable conversations she probably didn't expect to have. From protest messaging to cultural commentary, she's been making noise. When she sat down with Bill Maher on Club Random and tried to sell those same ideas in an actual back and forth, something shifted fast. Maher didn't nod along. He didn't treat her resume as a reason to go easy. He pushed into specifics, pulled the conversation out of slogan mode, and forced it into something a lot more revealing. Here's exactly how that exchange unfolded and why it matters more than just a celebrity debate.
Are you kidding? Really? It was about a garage door?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is...
No, you know this about California. Come
No,
on.
I don't.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't.
You don't? You've never heard that California is overtaxed and overregulated? That we are a one-party state where there's sort of no checks on that sort of extreme leftism. And what do you think?
I don't for a minute consider California a state that is extreme leftist. Not at all, not any way.
Well, that shows where your politics.
The first thing that hits you watching this exchange is just how insulated Jane Fonda sounds, and not in a subtle way. She comes across like someone who has spent so long inside the world of celebrity activism, media praise, and political groupthink that she's genuinely lost track of how these arguments land outside that bubble. When your environment consistently rewards moral performance over honest scrutiny, it becomes very easy to start confusing applause with truth. That's exactly where Maher becomes a problem for her. He doesn't react like a fan. He doesn't treat prestige as proof of anything. He keeps dragging the conversation back to one uncomfortable question: how do ordinary people actually hear this? And that's where the discomfort starts showing up on her face.
And these were people who were happy when Kennedy got assassinated. They became the birthers. They became the Tea Party. There's about a third of this country that's very hard right. Of course they love Trump. When he left office, he had an approval rating of 34%. So he really only had those people. Why is he now tied? Because the other part of the coalition are people who, they don't really like him that much. They just think the far left has gone so nutty on so many issues.
That's what they're being told.
That's what
by people like you.
Because it's true. You
Here's
think
what
the
makes
far
this
left
part of
does
the
nothing
exchange
crazy?
so revealing. The
I'm sure
contradiction doesn't take long to surface. Fonda tries to frame Maher's concern about the far left as exaggeration, as if the whole thing is mostly a manufactured panic cooked up by critics looking for something to complain about. But almost immediately, she ends up conceding the very point she was trying to dismiss. And that's the pattern, isn't it? First the denial. Then the deflection. Then the reluctant admission that yes, some of this is actually happening. That shift matters enormously, because once it happens, the debate is no longer about whether there's a problem. It becomes a fight over how big the problem is and who's been pretending not to see it. That's a much harder argument to win.
But I don't know, who is the far left? What do you mean when you say far left?
I mean, I could give you a million examples.
Yeah, well, give me one.
Okay, the NAACP.
You think the NAACP is far
Could I
left?
finish my sentence?
Yes.
You asked me for an example.
Yeah.
Travel advisory, that's like the State Department does to go to, I'm sure when you went to Vietnam, they were advising you not to. There's a war on.
I didn't talk to them. I don't have no.
I know, but a travel advisory.
Yeah.
Today we have them for very dangerous countries.
Yeah.
Don't go to North Korea. Don't go to Iran.
Yeah.
You know where they issued a travel advisory for Black people not to go?
Yeah.
Florida. Every day there's stories like that that just makes people roll their eyes and go, are you people nuts? Even if they don't matter that much, I don't think one person listened to this and thought, I can't go to Florida. But they just suggest something to the average person, which I completely understand, which is, wow, do you people ever find anything that's ridiculous?
And that's exactly why the Florida example lands so hard in this conversation. The moment Maher is pressed to get specific, he doesn't stay abstract. He points to something concrete, something that a huge number of viewers would immediately recognize as the kind of move that makes the activist class look completely disconnected from common sense. Whether anyone agrees with the specific advisory or not almost becomes beside the point. Maher's bigger argument is this: it's not any single moment or any one slogan that turns people off. It's the accumulation. It's the steady build of moments where ordinary voters look at a cultural institution, a media voice, or a political movement and ask themselves, are these people actually serious? That reaction has a real political cost. And Maher clearly understands exactly how that cost gets paid.
You really think men can get pregnant? You know, that kind of stuff. And I understand that a trans woman can get pregnant. That's different than a man getting pregnant. And the way they sort of insist on blurring that line is if that's some sort of reasonable social cause, as opposed to just being for having full rights, respect, and protection for trans people.
And then the conversation hits what might be the sharpest flashpoint of the entire exchange: the fight over biology. Maher's position isn't complicated and he doesn't dress it up. He's not saying disrespect transgender people. He's saying stop pretending a transgender woman can get pregnant because she can't. That's not hatred. That's science. But the problem, as Maher frames it, is that parts of the transgender rights movement keep pushing claims that don't survive contact with basic biology, that men can give birth, that sex and gender have zero connection, and then seem genuinely confused about why people stop listening. Every time those demands require the public to deny what their own eyes and basic knowledge tell them, real allies walk away. Not opponents. Allies. People who would fight hard for transgender dignity and legal protection, but who won't throw out common sense as the price of admission. The strategy Maher is pointing toward is straightforward: fight for freedom, protect dignity, but stop making agreement with contested biology a loyalty test. Because the moment you start punishing people for disagreeing instead of persuading them, backlash doesn't just build. It explodes.
Get that.
So I've never heard about men getting pregnant. I've never heard about this argument. It must be some part of what you call the far left that is so minuscule that I, who am...
No, Jane.
What?
It's not minuscule, and I'm sorry, you can't throw this back on us. I assume it's because you are locked into media that just never wants anyone in their audience to know anything sketchy about the blue team.
This is where the conversation really turns against Fonda.
This is where the conversation really starts turning against Fonda. She attempts to shrink the whole issue, to present it as some tiny fringe phenomenon that barely registers in the real world. But that argument collapses almost immediately. Too many people have already heard these slogans, watched these debates play out, and seen these ideas move through media, schools, entertainment, and politics for that excuse to carry any weight. Maher's response lands because he's not arguing that every Democrat believes the same thing. His argument is more precise than that: these ideas have become influential enough, mainstream enough, that pretending they're invisible no longer works as a defense. And the moment Fonda shifts from defending the rhetoric to acting like she's barely encountered it, the whole performance stops looking like a counterargument. It starts looking like an evasion.
And that's...
I mean, I don't know. I read 2 papers, and maybe I don't. I should watch Fox News.
No,
I guess.
I don't watch that. That's too far. But you don't have to. I'm not going to torture myself.
By the time the Fox News line enters the conversation, the energy in the room has already shifted. And what makes that moment stick isn't the joke itself, it's what the joke seems to accidentally reveal. It sounds like a brief crack in the shell. A moment where Fonda indirectly acknowledges that the information world she's been operating inside might be narrower than she realized. That's the real thread running through this entire exchange. Not just disagreement, isolation. Maher isn't introducing her to some obscure corner of the internet that most people have never encountered. He's pointing to arguments and reactions that millions of ordinary Americans have been watching and discussing for years. And when someone with her level of public profile seems genuinely caught off guard by that, it says something significant about just how sealed off elite conversations can become from the country they claim to speak for.
Yeah, there's a lot we could unpack there, but that certainly has been the history of this country. Was police who were all too willing to shoot black people. So defund the police, though, was not a good idea. And you know who mostly didn't think it was a good idea was black people, because they want police in their neighborhoods, probably more than we need them in.
The same dynamic surfaces again when the conversation moves to defund the police, and this is one of the clearest examples in recent memory of how emotionally satisfying slogans can completely collapse once reality starts pushing back. In the heat of the moment, it was packaged as moral clarity, bold, necessary, overdue. But over time, the consequences became harder to ignore, especially in the communities that depend most heavily on public safety. That's why Maher's point cuts beyond a single soundbite. He's identifying a recurring pattern. Parts of the activist left keep confusing moral performance with workable policy. They treat the slogan as the solution. And when the fallout arrives, many of the same voices that pushed hardest suddenly act like the public just misunderstood what they really meant. That cycle has done serious, lasting damage to credibility, and the people who paid the price for it weren't the ones holding the microphones.
The Republicans tried to catch the Democrats with this, and they put this on, they brought it up in Congress.
Yeah.
And all the Democrats voted against it. The Democratic politicians were not for defunding the police. It's that radical fringe that has captured a lot of the media, academia, some of these cultural institutions that are not liberal anymore by my old school liberalism. The ACLU is all about free speech. They don't really believe in it anymore. They believe, in one of their chief people who is trans said, I will die on this hill of banning this.
Maher's larger argument is that this problem has moved well beyond a few loud voices operating on the fringes. In his view, the tone of the broader left is increasingly being set by its most ideologically rigid members, and everyone else is quietly adjusting to them. They shape the language. They pressure institutions. They systematically narrow the space for any disagreement. Meanwhile, plenty of people who should be pushing back stay silent, because they've watched what happens to people who say the wrong thing and they've decided the cost isn't worth it. That's what makes this bigger than one uncomfortable debate clip. It becomes a cultural operating system where fear replaces honest debate and conformity replaces persuasion. And if a political movement keeps rewarding that dynamic, keeps treating silence as loyalty and dissent as betrayal, it shouldn't be surprised when everyday voters start quietly backing away from it.
Top story. Most voters say U.S. can't repair severe divisions. They went into the fact that 5 years ago, even during the pandemic and during the George Floyd protests, even then, people thought, well, we are going to get through this. And now they seem to be on the page of, it's not going to happen.
Bill,
what do we do? But did you see the story?
Yeah, and I think what's new about this moment, one of my teachers and friends, Dov Seidman, likes to say this, we aren't divided, we are being divided.
That's right.
By companies for profit, okay? And we have our divisions, we always have.
And straight up, the idea that all this division is just some random byproduct of modern politics doesn't hold up. A lot of it is being fed, reinforced, and weaponized. Here's the deal: polarization gives ideological activists leverage, because outrage makes people easier to control and easier to shame. When every disagreement gets reframed as a moral emergency, anyone who refuses to repeat the approved line automatically becomes the enemy. That's not how healthy political cultures operate. That's how purity systems operate. And once that mentality takes hold, dialogue stops being about persuasion and becomes a loyalty test instead. Careers get threatened. Reputations get torched. Friendships break down. And ordinary people learn fast to keep their real opinions to themselves. That's not tolerance. That's intimidation wearing the mask of virtue. And a lot of folks are starting to recognize it for exactly what it is.
At some point, you on your phone, you ordered a yoga mat or something. Your algorithm figured out you're a liberal. Then your neighbor looked up a truck, you're a conservative. And from that day forward, you got different information every day and nobody's been to notice. And so now you literally think your neighbor is insane, because how could they possibly think this stuff? But if you put your phone next to their phone, you're in different algorithmic universes, and that is brand new and very.
The piece of this broader conversation that deserves the most serious attention is the point about algorithms and information silos, because this is where the problem gets self-reinforcing. When people are constantly being fed different realities by platforms designed to flatter them rather than challenge them, mutual understanding doesn't just become difficult. It becomes almost structurally impossible. Social media keeps serving users more of what reassures them, more of what confirms what they already believe, and less of what actually tests those beliefs against something real. That doesn't produce informed citizens. It produces isolated tribes, each one increasingly convinced that their version of reality is the only one that makes sense. If there's any real path back from this, it probably starts with more exposure to honest disagreement and less dependence on carefully curated comfort. People need to be able to hear arguments they don't like without treating that experience as an attack. Because if we keep confusing familiarity with truth and confusing outrage with insight, we're just going to keep getting more of the same. If this breakdown resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and drop your take in the comments. The conversation doesn't stop here.